Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our webinar in partnership with the Historic Towns Trust. Thank you for joining, and to our regular attendees, it's lovely to see you again. And if you're joining us for the first time, a very warm welcome to you. I'm Jane Golding, Vice Chair of the British Association for Local History, and I'll shortly be handing over to Rowie Sweet from the Historic Towns Trust, who is your host this evening, and will be introducing our speaker, Tony Kirby. We're delighted to be a partner again with the Historic Towns Trust and bring you another series of lectures in the programme, Mapping Our Past, Shaping Our Future. There'll be time for questions at the end of the talk. Please pop your questions and comments into the Q&A facility, and I will join you again on screen at the end of the talk and put your questions to Tony and Rowie. If you have any technical difficulties, please use the chat function, and our digital team will sort these for you. So I'll now hand over to Rowie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane. And it's a great pleasure to be back again with the BALH. I gave a lecture as part of this series last year, and it was wonderful how many people attended and the fantastic questions that people asked. So it's a great privilege to be here again this evening. Those of you for whom the Historic Towns Trust is a new concept, can I encourage you to look at our website, Historic Towns Trust, all one word, .uk. And we're a charity which exists to investigate the histories of towns in England, Scotland and Wales. And we communicate this through creating atlases and maps. And we create these atlases and maps in partnership with local historians, geographers and archaeologists. And there we publish a series of the Historic Towns Atlas and also historical maps in our Towns and City Historical Map series. And the most recent one we have published was the map of Cambridge, which came out at the end of last year in December. And I'm absolutely delighted that our collaborator and colleague, a fantastic collaborator and colleague, Dr. Tony Kirby, is speaking this evening. Tony exemplifies the kind of map-based local history that we try to achieve in our maps and atlases. He's worked himself on an atlas of Cambridge and Huntingdonshire history. He's written a history of Anglia Ruskin, where he was a lecturer in history, as well as the coordinator of strategic and curriculum planning. But he's also interested in many other topics, such as religion and the history of transport, as well as urban topography. I know that Tony was the driving force behind the Cambridge map. And I'm really, as someone who was born and brought up in Cambridge, I'm really looking forward to hearing Tony talk about the Cambridge Townscape from 1550 to 2024. Thank you, Tony.
Okay, well, thank you, Rowie, and good evening, everyone. I hesitate to be described as the driving force. I mean, it was very much a collaborative effort producing the map, and in particular, my colleagues Liz Bajent and Giles Darks, Giles being responsible for cartography, really did a lot more than I did. So what I'm going to do this evening is just try to give you a little bit of information about how Cambridge has developed over the past 500 years, and hopefully, if I start to share screen, we should be there, and with a bit of luck, come on. For some reason, it is not allowing me to start the slideshow. Let's have another go.
Tony, I wouldn't worry about it. You can just show them from there.
Can I write? It's possibly when we move on, it may possibly do it. Let's have a go. Oh. Okay, let's just see whether we can do anything now. No, it's it seems to be. I do apologise for this, ladies and gentlemen, but hopefully it won't spoil your enjoyment too much, seeing what's coming up next. In fact, it might even be an advantage. My text, as it were, for this evening is from Thomas Fuller. Oxford is a university and a town. Cambridge, a town in a university. And what I want to do over the next 45 minutes or so is to explore to what extent this is true, to what extent it has been true in the past, and how far things have changed over the past 5 centuries or so. And I think it's perhaps significant that Cambridge City Council itself, in its logo, was unable to find anything that symbolised the city of Cambridge, other, of course, than the most iconic of all university buildings, King's College Chapel. And you could argue that the river and the bridge perhaps symbolise the city as well, but it is, of course, King's that's known all over the world. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with Cambridge, just a couple of maps to start with. On the left is Cambridge as it was in 1800. Basically, what you've got is this, I hope you can see my cursor, north-west to southeast road, which is basically following the line of the old Roman road from Godmanchester out in Huntingdonshire down to towards Colchester. That is what is now Bridge Street, and coming along and becomes Regent Street and Hills Road. And the other main street here is the London Road, which is Trinity Street, King's Parade, and then Trumpington Street. And as I'll explain in a moment or two, there was actually a third major axis, which had long disappeared by the time that this map was produced. And on the right-hand side, we've got one of the crucial features in Cambridge's development, the fact that it's surrounded by open fields. The 2 fields belonging to Cambridge itself, the East Field or the Barnwell Field and the West Field, and Chesterton Field, the open fields around the village of Chesterton, which is now part of Cambridge, but was a separate village until well into the late 19th century. And it's these fields, the development of these fields, that we shall look at quite a lot over the course of the evening. And if we move on, and we seem to be having problems. Cool. Not quite sure what has gone wrong here. It was perfectly all right 5 minutes ago. Right, there we are. This is the first known map of Cambridge, or certainly the whole of Cambridge, drawn by a cartographer called Richard Lyne in 1574. And as you can see, you can make out very clearly it's exactly the same in terms of street layout as the map of 1800 we saw on the previous slide. The only thing is there are some changes in perspective, particularly in the northwestern corner here, the old Roman bit of Cambridge, where to actually fit this onto the paper he was working on, he's had to introduce a totally non-existent bend in Bridge Street, where it crosses the river. And the detail on the right-hand side, I think, gives you some indication of what a lovely map this is. It's not in any sense particularly accurate. His depiction of King's College Chapel leaves a lot to be desired, but it shows a lot of what is going on in Cambridge, and particularly the animals of somewhat indeterminate species, it must be said, and on the west bank of the river. They look a bit like sort of woolly armadillos, but I'm not totally certain. This is very much a town which is still in many respects a village. A lot of people are still engaged in agriculture, either part-time or full-time. And a little more detail of it. This is just the enlargement of the Bridge Street area, where, as you can see, he shows the housing very, very conventional. There's no attempt to differentiate between individual properties. It's almost like a child's drawing of a town. He does try to show the churches in a little more detail. So we've got St. Clement's Church here, and the rather delightfully named St. Pulchre's Church, which is an interesting one because, of course, it isn't St. Pulchre. There is no St. Pulchre. It's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the round church, but nonetheless, it's obviously been corrupted in Cambridge by the late Tudor period into sepulchre. And in the 18th century, following on from what Fuller had said in the 17th century, Daniel Defoe said the tradesmen may justly be said to get their bread by the colleges. And this was, if you like, a rather two-edged arrangement. The tradesmen knew very well that they got their bread from the colleges, to the extent that many shops in Cambridge, at least until the late 19th century, actually closed down during the university vacations because there was no trade. So they're dependent on the university, but equally, as you might perhaps imagine, they resent the university as well. They resent its powers and its privileges. For example, its power to regulate weights and measures, its involvement in civic affairs, its powers to license premises, so inns, etc., to license theatrical performances, and in particular, the fact that it had its own private police force. And here they are, the proctors, who from the Middle Ages had rather ill-defined powers. These were codified in 1825, and it effectively allowed the proctors to exercise all police powers within 5 miles of Great St. Mary's Church, which was the town centre. The proctors themselves are academics, and there they are on the front row. And here behind them, very proudly, stand the police force, effectively, the bulldogs, as they're always known. And whenever I see this photograph, it always does look as if they're about to sort of all stamp forward and burst into song with when proctoring duties to be done. A bulldog's lot is not a happy one, perhaps. But they're still there, although their role nowadays is purely ceremonial. Now, I mentioned a few minutes ago that there was a third street in Cambridge, Milne Street, and this was between Trinity Street and the river. And this was, before the coming of the university in the 13th century, this was the major commercial street of Cambridge. This is where all the merchants lived, with warehouses and their own residential properties, with quays behind, as hithes, as they were called, on the River Cam. And you've got to think of somewhere perhaps like King's Lynn today, a very similar sort of arrangement. And I think it's symbolic of the power of the colleges and the university that Mill Street, the commercial heart of the town, is destroyed by the university in the late Middle Ages. Properties are taken over by colleges, either by purchase or by inheritance. And symbolic, perhaps, of a whole lot here, right across the middle of what remains of Mill Street, which is now Trinity Lane, King's College Chapel of the 15th century. By the late 17th century, we're getting much more accurate maps than lines have been. And this is David Logan's very well-known map of 1688, very accurate, very carefully surveyed, and very much, in a sense, almost like a modern ordnance survey map. And Logan accompanied this with two famous views, one of the town from the east, one of it from the west, again, stressing very much the agricultural nature of the town. And he also produced, at the same time, a series of marvelous aerial views of the colleges, which, from the point of view of architectural historians, are invaluable, although they have to be treated with a slight degree of caution. And from the point of view of the urban historian, one problem is that they do just show the colleges in total isolation. This is Gondolin Quays College, and you would not think from this that Quays is surrounded by the town. There are buildings all over. Down here on this wall here, the wall did not exist in this form. This looks like a broad thoroughfare here, didn't exist. There was housing here, and it was only here at the Gate of Honour, which is where the students of Quays come out to the Senate House to receive their degrees. Only from that point onwards was there a much narrower lane than Logan actually shows. The town itself, I think that there seems to be general agreement amongst anyone who visited Cambridge in the 17th, 18th, early 19th centuries, that it wasn't much to write home about. It's got no distinguished buildings, and many people said it actually seemed more like a village than a town. Nowadays, of course, what remains of early modern Cambridge is beautifully preserved, and this is Bridge Street. We've got St John's College on the left there, going up towards Magdalen in the far distance. In the 19th century, and indeed 2 or 3 centuries before that, it was all very different. Photographs from the 1870s onwards do show what is really a rather neglected looking town. And this does seem to be, again, the verdict of everyone who visited Cambridge, that the town itself is just not worth notice. It's the university building, it's the college buildings, as you can see on the right here. This is Silver Street and this is Queen's College. It's the university and college buildings, which are the ones that people come to see. And in Cambridge, like virtually every other town in the 18th century, rich and poor are living cheek by jowl. The photograph we saw a moment ago of Bridge Street, I took it just down here on the corner, hoping you can see my cursor. We've got Bridge Street going up towards the northwest. You've got these big houses on the street frontage. Immediately behind, you're suddenly into this rabbit warren of courts and alleyways and passages, which are grossly overcrowded. The problem being in Cambridge, as in so many other towns, that it cannot grow outwards as population grows. Population had probably been about 5,000 in 1700. It was edging on for 10,000 by 1800. The town can't grow out because of the surrounding open fields, and consequently, just as in somewhere like Nottingham, all it can do is grow in on itself with more and more concentration of population. All of these, or nearly all of these, courts were swept away in the 1920s and 1930s. Just 1 or 2 survive, and this is one that still is there today. Tunwell's Yard off Trumpington Street, for those of you who know Cambridge, is just opposite the Fitzwilliam Museum. And this was very typical of this sort of development. Like several of the other courts, it was painted by this wife of an academic, Grace Pollock, in 1935. And it gives some indication, I think, of, again, the fact that once you move off the main streets, the domestic architecture of Cambridge is really pretty grotty. It's only in the very late 18th century that we do start to get some illustrations of the town itself. This is Rowlandson's view of the marketplace, which we've used in the notes on the reverse of the map. And as you can see, there is a slight degree of pretension. This rather nice building on the left here with the balcony and the Venetian window, which still survives. And in the middle is the fountain, Hobson's conduit, bringing fresh water into the town, and dominated at the far end by the Guildhall, again, totally remodeled in the 1930s, and the home until 1835, what was possibly the most corrupt of all the municipal corporations in England. What new building there is in Cambridge before the 19th century is almost invariably associated with the colleges. And this is one of the first examples of the new. Christopher Wren's Pembroke Chapel of 1665, which when it was first built must have appeared glaringly and shockingly modern to the people of Cambridge, in exactly the same way as some of the things that have been done in the 21st century appear today. It was Wren's first made, in fact, his first Architectural Commission, full stop, helped by the fact that his uncle, Matthew Wren, Bishop of Ely, was also Master of Pembroke. And so it is very much jobs for the boys. But it's a bit isolated. And one thing that you don't find in Cambridge, unlike other towns like Bury St Edmunds or Stamford, is much Georgian building. There's a very slight degree of refronting, but really Georgian buildings are few and far between. And there are only really about half a dozen examples, of which these are probably two of the best. The first on the left is the Master's Lodge of Peterhouse, which wasn't actually built for the college. It was bequeathed to Peterhouse in 1725 by a local doctor for whom it was built, and Little Trinity in Jesus Lane, just a little bit later, 1725, and built for a prosperous townsman. The big turning point in the history of Cambridge comes in 1807, when at long last the open fields were enclosed. And by 1830, as you can see here, there's been quite a bit of development on the eastern side over the Barnwell field. Again, if you can see my cursor, we've got the Newmarket Road going out along there. We've still got all the commons. They survived, luckily, the process of enclosure. Virtually no development on the western side of the river, and this was the case until the late 19th century. You may just be able to see, and I'm just going to see if I can actually get back to the full screen, and I can't, that it's actually rather patchy development. You will not, I think, be able to see the details, but as you can see, there are pockets of building. There's still quite a little bit of open space on the eastern side in the 1830s. So it is piecemeal, and it's carried out by a variety of people, one or two large-scale developers, the colleges, and a lot of small speculative builders. And I'm not quite sure. Yes, here we are. This, just to give you some indication of what is happening. On the left-hand side, we've got the population of Cambridge from 1801 down to 1931. And as you can see, it is a very gradual increase right through the 19th century. The fact that there's a break in the series between 51 and 61 reflects the fact that down to 1851, the census was taken during university term time. After 1861, it's during vacations. And the big jump there is because the borough was extended quite considerably in 1911 to take in some of the surrounding villages. The graph on the right shows the population of East Cambridge, the St Andrew Vallès parish, or Barnwell, as it was usually known, that area that we saw a moment ago on the map, which is being developed. And as you can see, apart from a slight hiatus in the 1850s, it's a pretty constant growth right through the 19th century and only levelling off in the 1920s and 1930s. And as I mentioned a moment ago, this is all due, the building is all due to a variety of different people. And perhaps the most important of the private developers is this man, Charles Humphrey. Almost forgotten today, but until recently, but now commemorated by a blue plaque, 1772 to 1848, and the blue plaque says it all: architect, developer, banker, and mayor. He was a great figure in Cambridge, as you can see, and it's perhaps as developer and architect that he's best known today, and this was his first major development. This is on the very edge of the town. Maid's Causeway is the bottom end of Newmarket Road, just where it comes into what had been medieval Cambridge. And he developed this quite small area in about 1811, 1813, with big, as you can see, almost detached houses along the Maid's Causeway frontage. They're quite narrow houses. They're only actually one room deep, and they're joined by porches on each side, then smaller houses on each side here, and on Willow Walk, the back here, is smaller houses still. And Willow Walk, which we can see here, is important in a sense because it sets the pattern for what happened for the next 20 years or so. Other developers copied what Humphrey had done. He got no architectural training, incidentally. He seems to be totally self-taught, but he produces this very attractive terrace with a central pediment, with the balusters, as you can see on the centre there. And this is copied by other developers, notably Jesus College. They were the other major landowner in the area immediately next to the old town centre. And Eden Street, which was built between 1825 and 1830, as you can see here, apart from the fact that it's on a slight curve, is almost identical to Humphrey's Willow Walk development. And this is a street very much built for really the skilled working class of Cambridge, skilled artisans. And it's people like tailors, cobblers, robe makers, people of that nature that you will find living here in the 1841 census. Slightly more upmarket, but again developed by Jesus, New Square. Which is impossible to photograph as a whole. There are actually three sides to New Square. This is the north side, there's an eastern side over here, and a southern side, western side here. And as you can see, once again, it is following very much the pattern that Humphrey had laid down, the central pediment, giving this stress to what would otherwise be a rather boring row of terraced houses. And by the 1850s, the situation was really like this. There had been a lot of development here. Here is Christ Pieces. They were on the edge of the town, the old town here. And the major feature to look at is East Road, which is the road coming down here, running from northeast down to southwest. Because this divided respectable Cambridge, this very quite upmarket development that had been since the 1810s, from the other side, which was Barnwell proper. And there was a big difference. And this is East Road. On the far side, this is what I was talking about. This is going towards New Square, etc. On this side, as you can see, there's quite an embankment here where on the edge of the road. It's low-lying, marshy ground, and this is developed from the 1820s as something that became almost from the word go, a slum. This was where what the 19th century would have regarded as the dregs of society were living. And here it is, described by the Cambridge Chronicle in 1853, the focus of villainy, receptacle of dishonest spoil, the refuge of the petty thief and the fully developed scoundrel, fashioned by the hand of crime, dissoluteness, the physical dross of Cambridge, the abodes are dark and cheerless, the dissolute characters, the women are living by perpetual dishonour, hole in the wall has guilt stamped on its very walls. It was built, one would think, for a nursery of crime. And it was this that continued, in fact, to be slum housing until the 1920s, 1930s, all now gone. But there was a very different Barnwell. And here we've got a map showing what was sold in 1809 by, as you can see, the estate of the late Mr. Panton. Now, Mr. Panton was the lord of the manor of Barnwell, and he'd got a lot of property at the time of enclosure. And this shows part of the estate as it was sold in 1809. And to orientate you, it's rather an odd map because north is to the left, but there's Parker's Piece, for those of you who know Cambridge. Here's Regent Street, here's Hills Road, so we're going down towards the station. Here is East Road, up here. Here is Mill Road, going down there. What I've tried to do in the colouring is to show what happened to this and how Keys got involved. It got a little bit of land, which I've marked with the horizontal red lines, at the time of enclosure. When Panton's executors decided to sell off the rest of the estate in 1809, Keys bought the ones that I've coloured in a sort of rather purple colour, and then subsequently bought the areas that I've marked in yellow. They didn't, for whatever reason, buy the whole lot. And so if you look here, for example, on Mill Road, you've got this area that they didn't take. And what happened for about 50 years after 1809 is that Caius did absolutely nothing with its land, simply let it out for agricultural purposes, whereas the land that it didn't have was quite quickly taken over by speculative builders. And so Lot 19, for example, there became Covent Garden. And this is so very, very typically inner city in character, dated from about 1850, in nearly all of the houses down here. It's so very urban in character. It's difficult to appreciate that this was actually in open countryside when it was built. It must have been a very, very strange situation to be in. Caius itself doesn't do anything until the 1870s, and then it really does start. I think there are two factors here. The first is that it was the very first college to allow its fellows to marry, which meant, of course, fellows you tend to have large families, they have servants, and they want housing. And so Mortimer Road, which was the very first Caius development, is 1877, is very largely built for academics. The second factor was the fact that Caius had got extensive estates, but they were mainly in Norfolk. And they were hit, as you can see here, by the Great Agricultural Depression that started effectively in 1875. Caius suddenly found itself facing what was almost financial ruin. And you can see from the rental totals here how things have altered in 10 years. Caxton down from 150 to 81. Denver, up near Downham Market, down even more dramatically, 645 to 193 pounds. And so it goes on. And it's not surprising, perhaps, that Caius therefore decided very quickly to start urban development. It was the only way forward. It was lucky, in fact, that as well as owning all this land in the Cambridge area, it also, just by chance, happened to have large estates in the Amersham area, and so was able to profit at the same time by the development of metro land. And this is the Caius estate, Glisson Road. And what I tried to do here when I took this photograph some years ago, as you can see by the cars, was to show the difference between the houses that Caius built and the ones on the land that Caius didn't own. At the far end here, you can see how it's the character of the street suddenly changes when you get to that house with the slate roof and the white painted ones there. You move away from the bay windows and the inevitable little front garden, just protecting the inhabitants from the street, into much smaller houses. And the same thing is happening to a certain extent, but more slowly on the north side of the river. Here we are, this is Magdalen Bridge down here. Here is the Huntingdon Road going out there. Chesterton, outside the borough of Cambridge, had got a number of advantages. The major thing being that property here had lower rateable value. And consequently, from the 1840s onwards, there is some development here, particularly around this new road, Victoria Road, connecting the Milton Road, which is going out towards Ely, and the Huntingdon Road. But it was all rather slow because of the difficulty of access to the town. And in fact, access to the town, apart from Magdalen Bridge, was only possible by a whole series of ferries along the river here. It's 1889 when it all changes. The borough of Cambridge built a new road over Jesus Green, Victoria Avenue, which for the first time gives direct access between Chesterton and the town centre, because it also includes the bridge, which is produced here, as you can see, a lovely one, 1889. And it is this that then leads to the development of, again, a very respectable, very upmarket suburban area known as the Freville Estate, which developed from about 1892 onwards, houses selling at something between 220 and 400 pounds. Now, you'll be very lucky to find anything under £1 million in that area. At the same time as this is happening, there's a big change in the town centre, which is that the colleges which had hitherto been, in a sense, rather hidden, often by housing, invade the landscape. They suddenly break through into the street. And so here we've got Corpus Christi College, 1825, new frontage designed by William Wilkins in a rather anemic sort of Gothic with a K architectural style. And here at the King's on the left, we've got Wilkins again, but now Wilkins in really full-blooded medieval Gothic mode with his screen wall sweeping away all the houses that had stood here and screened Kings from the street. And John's crosses the river and is the very first college to start building on the West Bank with its new court of 1830. All of this reflecting, as you can see here, a growth in admissions from the low point of 200 odd in 1810 to nearly 1,000 by 1890. And all the colleges are expanding. Keys, once again, Keys have got a big problem because, as I mentioned earlier, it's on a very landlocked site. It did some redevelopment at the back in the Trinity Lane, the former Mill Street area, in the 1850s, with this rather nice hall block designed by Anthony Salvin. But round here on the Trinity Street frontage, you again just got housing until 1868, when they hired one of the most prominent architects of the period, of course, Alfred Waterhouse, to build what is now Tree Court. And this is a building which has had inevitably a very bad press over the years. It's a lovely building, perhaps in the wrong situation, but it is a very interesting building in the sense that it reflects Waterhouse's immense knowledge of the chateaux of the Loire, where he'd spent a lot of time in the 1850s sketching, and virtually every detail in Tree Court you can trace back to a particular chateau. But the problem is, of course, that it overshadows completely the Senate House. And this may or may not be deliberate, because it's built at a period when relations between the colleges, the individual colleges and the university, were at an all-time low. The colleges suspected that the university was after taking responsibility and indeed perhaps taking their endowments. And consequently, I think that Keyes is perhaps almost deliberately showing that the colleges really have the upper hand, which to a certain extent they did, but increasingly it's university buildings that dominate the townscape. On the left here, the Pitt Press, the University Press of 1830 in Trumpington Street. On the right is one that perhaps thankfully was never built. This is one of the rejected designs for the Fitzwilliam Museum, and it's impossible perhaps to imagine a less suitable design for a museum, but there you go. And this, of course, is what we got, George Besave's museum, built in the 1840s to house the art collection left to the university by Lord Fitzwilliam. And increasingly, it is the university that is dominating teaching and learning in the university, new faculty buildings, and here we've got the Divinity School of 1879, designed by Champneys. And from the 1880s onwards, particularly with the growth of science, the development of what is called the new museum site in Downing Street, with we've got Pembroke College on the right here, and the various faculty buildings on the left, and what is actually a rather grim fume-filled academic canyon, but nonetheless, the buildings themselves are worth looking at. And also, of course, new colleges, Selwyn, 1879, which was deliberately founded at a time when it was felt, with some justification, that the admission of nonconformists, not just the admission of nonconformists to the university, but the fact that they could now take degrees for the first time, was a threat to Anglican dominance. Selwyn, named after the first Bishop of New Zealand, is an Anglican riposte. And of course, also women's higher education with Newnham and Girton. Girton well outside the town, Newnham on the west bank, designed once again by Basil Champney, is a very versatile architect when you think what he'd done on the divinity schools. Interestingly, designed in this rather nice domestic style that you can see here, just in case it didn't succeed. The idea was that if the college failed, it could very easily be converted to domestic accommodation, let out as mansion flats or whatever. But of course, the college succeeded. Oops. And the other big development, of course, of the 19th century, the coming of the railway, kept well outside the town by university and college pressure. The university was extremely suspicious of the railway, the fact that it would give the undergraduates easy access to London. So it's kept at arm's length, about a mile from what was then the built-up area. And this is the station, portrayed in 1845 by the Illustrated London News on the day it opened. A rather nice building with a cab entrance on the far side there, another archway here covering the platform line. The artist has done his best to show the train. One thing he hasn't realised is that you've got a platform over there, and if you've got a platform, it's best to have a line next to the platform rather than some distance away here. But I suppose we can't blame him too much. He was probably dealing with something he'd never seen before. The station was built on land belonging to Jesus College. Jesus did very nicely out of it. There was an irony here, in fact, in the fact that the master of Jesus College, Dr. Corrie, was one of the most reactionary of all Cambridge academics in the 19th century. It was said that he was always looking for the last ditch to die in, and usually succeeded. But Jesus did, in fact, extremely well out of the coming of the railway, and was determined, in fact, to keep the area around the station upmarket, again on its own land. So Station Road in Cambridge doesn't acquire the commercial properties that you might find elsewhere on the main road leading to the station. It gets these big semi-detached houses, designed obviously for a prosperous householders, and to a certain extent it succeeded, but never quite as much as they wanted, because the big problem was that literally just round the corner was this Cambridge Locomotive Depot, with noise, whistles, steam, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, as it was, in fact, right down until the late 1950s. And here we've got the loco yard as it was in the 50s, nice BR stand at class 5 there. And the biggest or the tallest building in Cambridge, erected in the 1930s, the concrete mechanical coaling plant. The railway workers didn't live in that area. They were all on the other side of the river, other side of the railway, Romsey Town, very much a separate, almost entirely railway community, right down to the 1950s. About 700-800 people employed on the railway in 1911. It really is the biggest employer in the town. And it is a big physical fact, as you can see here. There's the station, the sidings, covering an immense area of southeast Cambridge. The one thing that we don't get in Cambridge very much in the 19th century is commercial building. We've got the Corn Exchange here, designed by local architect Richard Rowe, 1873, 1875, and again, a rather nice Italian style with carvings of agricultural scenes on the front. Like so many corn exchanges, built too late, built on the eve of the agricultural depression, and a white elephant, almost from the word go, went through a variety of uses and was going to be demolished in the 1980s, but luckily survives as a concert hall. And we've also got a major bank, Foster's Bank. The Fosters were a local family. They were millers and bankers as well, designed by Alfred Waterhouse. And it's here with this tower that you can see, designed in a very sort of Flemish fashion. You very much at home somewhere in the Low Countries. It was Waterhouse's, I think, last major commission. It's interesting enough from outside, but if you go inside, this is what you find. Unfortunately, I haven't got a colour photograph to show all this marvellous tiling work. And not surprisingly, Lloyd's has never been very keen on me going in and taking a photograph of the interior, but they were quite happy to give me black and white photographs of what it used to look like. And here it is, this tremendous banking hall illuminated by the dome, and perhaps one of the best kept secrets in Cambridge. Moving into the 20th century, one of the big features in Cambridge, as elsewhere, is the clearance of the slums, the development of suburban housing. That starts really in the very early 1920s with this, which was the conversion of what had been the first Eastern General Hospital for treating World War casualties into temporary accommodation, to accommodate people being cleared from the slums before council houses were built. Cambridge, as elsewhere, follows the designs in the Ministry of Housing's housing manual, starting off with relatively large houses in the 1920s. This is in Hinton Avenue. As economic considerations become more important in the 1930s, less grandiose houses are being built. But nonetheless, really, between the wars, Cambridge was one of the most progressive housing authorities in the country in terms of the number of houses that it built. And also, at the same time, of course, suburban speculative housing developing, particularly along the new Eastern bypass that was laid out in the 1930s. Here it is, this is Pern Road, and here you've got what is really a visual dictionary of all the architectural cliches of bypass variegated, going on for about 3 miles. And the bypass itself is an indication of the fact that there was now this attempt, which continued right down to the 1990s, to make the city fit for the motor vehicle. And this is what happened to New Square as a result, converted in 1931 to a car park, luckily now reverted back to grass. And also 1 or 2 very self-consciously modern houses for academics like Thurso in Madingley Road here, built in 1932. After the war, it is, of course, prefabs in Cambridge, as elsewhere, that are built. About 5,000 in 2 years. These are in Rustat Road on the east side of the railway. You've just got Railway Romsey Town at the back there. And then from the 1960s onwards, major development north of Cambridge with the Arbory estate, or we just call it the Arbory in Cambridge. Starting, as you can see, with very low density development compared to anything that you would find nowadays for the private or local authority. Big gardens, plenty of open space. Almost inevitably, of course, this couldn't last, and by the 1980s, we're moving on to what was not multi-storey, but obviously a much more crowded accommodation. And a further development at the same time is deindustrialization. Cambridge had been quite a major industrial centre, and by the 1980s, this is becoming a thing of the past. And this is symbolic, perhaps. This is the end of one of Cambridge's major employers, Pi, the radio and television firm. Their relatively new premises, built in the late 1960s, being demolished 20 years later to make way for housing. And the same thing applied to much of the former railway land. So on the left here, we've got the old Great Northern Goods Yard, Station Road in the background there with the big Jesus terraced houses. And on the right, from exactly the same viewpoint, what replaced it. It always looks as if it could have been put up in some sort of rather, relatively well-off East European town back in the 1970s. And it continues. There are major pressures on Cambridge housing. All around the town, houses are being built. Mr. Gove, of course, is talking about a further 150,000 to be built over the next 15 years or so, with no thought of what the water supply problems are going to be. And the university, also a major developer nowadays, its own very own quarter, West Cambridge, developing. This is Eddington, which is not exactly a thing of beauty and a joy forever. And certainly when you go there, you don't feel that you're in Cambridge at all. Entirely university accommodation and offices, etc., although some private development is now taking place. And also on the south side of the city, the biomedical campus around Addenbrooke Hospital. And this, of course, is perhaps the nerve centre of what the economic life of Cambridge and indeed the social life of Cambridge now depends on. The biomedical sector is vitally important and is about to be served by a new station in Cambridge South, which is being built. This is the photograph I took of it last year, going to open at some point during 2024. And coming on stream very shortly, the last bit of open space really on the eastern side of the city, the former Marshall's Airport, is due for development by the late 2020s, when Marshall's moved new premises elsewhere. And so Teversham, which at present is a rather nice and isolated village, will simply be swallowed up in this new development. So there's a tremendous amount going on in Cambridge, and yet, on the other hand, we have this. There is this undercurrent of people who simply have no homes to go to. And whenever I see sites like this, and you cannot avoid them in central Cambridge, I'm always reminded of the words of William Blake: "Is this a holy thing to see in a rich and fruitful land?" And I'll leave you to ponder on that, but just remind you that the historical map of Cambridge is available from all good bookshops online, £10.99, and I hope that you will buy it, and I hope that you will enjoy it. So there we are. My apologies for the fact that they haven't had full screen, but hopefully it hasn't stopped you appreciating too much. So I'm now going to stop sharing and hand back, I hope. Yes.
Well, thank you very much, Tony. That was a terrific tour through Cambridge's history, and I learned so much. I've taken several pages of notes. I mean, I grew up in Cambridge, but I saw Cambridge from a new perspective, and bits of Cambridge that I hadn't even seen, like Tummels Court opposite Fitzwilliam. I mean, I've never been penetrated that.
Nobody knew about it.
No.
Until recently. It was only when Peter House discovered that they owned it and decided to refurbish it. Everyone said, gosh, it's there.
It's there. It's extraordinary. So next time I go and visit my mother, I'm going to have to do a bit of exploration. It's absolutely fantastic. Yeah, as I say, absolutely fascinating. And so many things that I need to go and revisit next time I go back to Cambridge. And the medieval legacy in Cambridge is still quite strong, and there's a lot of the medieval buildings have been preserved, clearly partly because of the university. And I was just wondering, when do you think a strongly preservationist impulse really took root in Cambridge to try and preserve that medieval fabric rather than pull it down to make way for more grandiose 19th or 20th century buildings? Can you sort of identify when was a kind of tipping point towards let's preserve something distinctive here?
It's difficult to put one's finger on it. I would say probably not until well into the 20th century, 1920s, 1930s, because, for example, when William Morris came to Cambridge and did on several occasions to talk to the School of Art, etc. In the 1880s, he's talking about the destruction of medieval Cambridge for commercial redevelopment. And this continues apace into at least down to the First World War. And I think it is really only in the interwar period that there is some realization of what was being lost. And by that time, of course, a lot of the interesting buildings had been gone.
Yeah. And then Petty Curie went in the 1960s.
Exactly. Yes.
And that seems to me quite late, actually. I mean, it's interesting that it wasn't earlier, given.
Well, it's one of these things. I mean, there was a planning report in 1951, the Holford Wright planning report, which really mapped out what they thought Cambridge should happen over the next 30 or 40 years. And they proposed this new shopping centre with a dual carriageway going into it. And also the destruction of the whole of East Cambridge, again with new roads, etc. And that became the blueprint for development. It was regarded as holy writ, you know, and so consequently, the whole of the Petty Curie area, which could have been saved, was demolished in a very piecemeal sort of way. So it was, in a sense, people said, well, it's not worth saving. It's just got into such a state, and the same applied to East Cambridge.
Thank you very much, Tony. And I think we've got questions coming up already. So, Jane, are you able to manage that for me?
I will, yes. So there's lots of appreciative comments, people, you know, saying what wonderful insights you've given them and they're looking forward to visiting Cambridge. But we do have a couple of questions. Ian Myson asked, is part of the reason Cambridge is such a boom town now and the university and business science interests can expand freely, that much for the countryside around it is so nondescript?
Yes, the countryside is nondescript, certainly, yes. I mean, I think there is the realization now that the town has got to be contained. And again, the Halted Right proposals and all the other interwar and post-war planning proposals wanted to maintain the green belt, which is now very much under threat. The biomedical campus is effectively in the green belt. The northern Cambridge, once again, very low landscape quality, and just moving out into the fens. It was always regarded just as you can keep on expanding. Nobody will miss it. And wherever you go around Cambridge, you know, there is very little in the way of remarkable landscape or even memorable landscape. It's there, but really you don't notice it. And of course, it is the university which is behind most of what is going on.
Thank you. So we've got a question from Nigel Grimshaw. The Mill Road area has long had quite an Irish community. Was this initially related to the railway? Do you know?
I think it probably was, yes. It's the Irish community has got a long history in Cambridge, and there are a number of pubs and clubs which are very much and have been Irish associated. It's difficult to know whether they came in with building the railway or not. There are no records of who the actual navvies were who built the railway. And many of them, I think, were people who've been involved in fens drainage works and things like that. But they, again, may well have been Irish originally. But certainly by the 1860s, you get a strong Irish community. And this, I think, is really one of the reasons why there is quite a strong Roman Catholic presence in Cambridge, compared, you know, for a town of its size, compared to other towns. And of course, eventually this leads to the building of this great Our Lady and the English Martyrs Church in the 1890s, which was designed to be the Roman Catholic Cathedral for East Anglia. It didn't quite happen, and Norwich did, but there is this very strong as a Irish Catholic tradition in the town.
And Peter Evans would like to know something about St Barnabas, which has been beautifully restored, and he's just visited for the first time.
Oh, yes, yes. Yes, I mean, St Barnabas is one of the several Victorian churches in that part of Cambridge. So there's a very strong move towards domestic missions in Cambridge from the 1840s onwards, with, interesting enough, a lot of women playing a very important role as what we call domestic missionaries. And so you get in Hills Road, you get St Paul's Church, which was designed for the new town area, which is on the western side of Hills Road. You get St Barnabas, you get St Matthew's and St Philip's, etc. There's at least 4 Victorian churches, all designed, obviously, for a cross section of the community, because Mill Road area is interesting. On the one hand side, you've got a very middle class community. On the other side, you've got the skilled working class community, and the churches, I think, are trying to appeal to both. Although almost inevitably, I think it was the middle classes who supported them. But St Barnabas is a very big Victorian church and unfinished. It was intended to have a tower and a spire, but it's a rather grim-looking building from the outside, but it's very nice inside, like so many of these Victorian churches.
Yes, some excellent questions, some excellent answers as well. So we've got time for another one. So this is from Anne Benson. Apart from St John's and Pembroke's, do any other colleges have detached masters' lodges?
Oh, I would have to think about that one. Keys is, I mean, Keys is my own college, and Keys is very much built into the fabric of the college. Pass. I know. I can't think of one offhand. No, sorry, no, I can't.
So I think that might be all the questions, but I do hope you can see the comments, Tony.
I can, yes,
People
yes,
have
thank you.
Really,
yes.
really enjoyed this.
Oh, good. Somebody has got the map. That's nice. I've just seen.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm sorry it was such a dash through, and I'm sorry that we weren't able to have the full screen, but nonetheless, we got through it.
Absolutely, and the extent of your knowledge is wonderful. There's so much detail. That's excellent. Rory, do you have anything else you wanted to bring?
I don't think so. I'd just like to encourage everybody to buy the map if they haven't bought it already.
And buy the whole series. They're all worth getting.
Yes, well, and they, to quote Tony, they are a thing of beauty and they are a joy forever. There's constant new information you can find. You can order them on Amazon or get them from your local bookshop. I've lost count of how many we've got now, but they're all listed on the website, and we're in the process of producing more. So as Caroline Greenwood says, collect the series. And there's more information available on the website if you want to find out more about what we're doing and what we've published so far. But I'd just like to thank Tony again for absolutely terrific lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Well, good night, everyone. Good night.
Well, we are coming to the end now, but before we close, I'd just like to remind everybody about the next lecture in this series, which is Thursday, the 28th of March at 7 p.m. And that's Charting Ipswich History with James Winterbotham and Keith Wade. But do please also join us next Thursday, 7th of March, again at 7 p.m. And this is for the 2023 Diamond Lecture, which has been rescheduled from December. The lecture's by Professor Fiona Edmonds on Northumbrian Institutions Reconsidered. And that's looking at 3 upland communities in medieval Britain. So details of these events and others are all on our website. So it's been an excellent evening. Thank you very, very much, Tony, and thank you very much, Rowie. And thank you to Paul, who's been keeping things running smoothly behind the scenes. And then finally, thank you everyone for attending. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks very much. Bye.